Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to tear up the old rulebook for teaching writing. We're talking about moving away from the fear of that dreaded red pen and toward empowering students with skills they can actually use in the real world. So, how do we do it? Let's jump in.
All right, let's kick things off with a question that might ruffle some feathers. We've all been there, right? That little pang of dread when you get a paperback covered in red ink. But what if all that focus on correcting every single mistake is actually counterproductive? What if it's getting in the way of what really matters, which is just clear, effective communication?
And that leads us right into our first big idea. We need to completely rethink the red pen. This is all about a massive shift in how we think about writing. It's about moving away from this old-fashioned idea that writing is some kind of magical talent you're born with, and seeing it for what it truly is, a practical skill that anyone can learn.
Yeah, this slide just lays it out perfectly. On the one hand, you have the old view, the idea that you either have it or you don't, and the teacher's job is basically to be an error detective. But the modern view? It's so much more empowering. It says, hey, writing is just a way to communicate. And like any skill, whether it's playing guitar or learning to code, it can be broken down, taught, and developed with practice.
Okay, so if writing is a skill we can teach, how do we actually do it? Well, you have to know where you're going before you start the journey, and that brings us to our second point. You have to start with the goal. And the tool we're going to use for this is a really simple but powerful framework called backward design.
So what in the world is backward design? Honestly, it's just like using Google Maps. You don't just get in the car and start driving, right? No, you plug in your destination first. It's the exact same idea in teaching. You start by asking, at the end of all this, what do I want my students to actually be able to do? Once you have that final destination locked in, it's so much easier to figure out the steps to get there. And this is where the magic really happens. You take these fuzzy, abstract goals and you turn them into super concrete, real-world actions. An idea like learn about recipes becomes a really clear, can-do statement. Students and write out the steps in a recipe. See the difference? These aren't just stuffy learning objectives. They're useful things you can do with language. They give the whole lesson a real purpose. So we've got our destination, our can-do statement. Now what? How do we actually build the lesson itself? Well, that leads us to Section 3, the three-phase writing lesson. Think of this as the step-by-step blueprint for putting our plan into action.
And to make this really tangible, let's use a simple, real-world example. A lost cat poster. Now, this isn't some abstract essay about your summer vacation, right? This is a problem that needs a solution. You have a very clear goal. Get my cat back. And to do that, you have to communicate very specific information to a very real audience.
So the lesson itself breaks down into three simple phases. First up, pre-writing. This is where we set everyone up for success. We brainstorm words, look at other posters. Basically, we get rid of that scary blank page anxiety. Then we move into the during writing phase. Here, the only job is to write. Get the ideas down on paper without worrying about perfection. And finally, you have the post-writing phase. This is where we close the loop. Students share what they wrote, get feedback, and actually see how their writing lands with a real reader.
Okay, the lesson's done, the posters are written. Now comes the part everyone dreads, assessment. But this is where that huge mindset shift we talked about really kicks in. So for Section 4, we're talking about assessing what matters most, which means looking way beyond just grammar and spelling.
So instead of grabbing that red pen and hunting for mistakes, this approach gives us a new toolkit with 4 key criteria. First, and most importantly, language function. Did the student actually do the task? Second, text type. Does it look and feel like a poster? Third, comprehensibility. Can I understand it? And finally, fourth, we look at language control, the grammar and vocabulary. Looking at all 4 gives us a much more complete picture of what a student can do.
And this right here is the heart of it. This whole approach is about changing assessment from a gotcha game into a way of seeing and celebrating success. We're not looking for what's wrong. We're actively looking for what the student did achieve. And that is so much more motivating.
Now, to really get how we assess things, you have to meet someone called the sympathetic reader. This is a huge concept. Just think about a parent listening to their toddler. The parent isn't sitting there correcting grammar, right? They're just trying to understand what the child wants. A sympathetic reader is anyone, a teacher, a friend, who is invested in understanding the meaning, not just judging the perfection of the language.
I mean, these examples are just perfect. Is I good fast grammatically correct? No way. But do you understand what it means? Instantly, without even trying.
Communication happened. And that's the whole point. A sympathetic reader can easily get the message, which proves that the communication was a success, even if there were a few bumps along the way.
And all of this brings us to our final and maybe the most important section of all. This is where we totally transform the role of the teacher, moving from a critic to a coach. It's all about using this new way of assessing to give feedback that actually helps students become better communicators.
And this slide, this is the whole game plan right here. It organizes those 4 criteria into a hierarchy, and this is so important. Look at what's at the very top, our primary focus. Did they do the task, and is it organized correctly? If the answer is yes, that's a huge win. Everything else, how easy it is to understand, and the nitty-gritty grammar, is secondary. It matters for sure, but it's in service of that main goal, getting the message across.
So really, the big takeaway is this. We have to redefine what we mean by good writing. Success is not about a paper having 0 errors. Success is about the reader understanding the message. If the communication happens, then the writing has succeeded in its most fundamental purpose. So, I'll leave you with this question to think about. What's our real goal here? Are we teaching students to be timid, to be so afraid of making a mistake that they barely say anything at all? Or are we empowering them to be confident communicators who feel ready and able to share their ideas with the world? Because the path we choose really does make all the difference.